Joining us now, Gregg Jarrett, Fox News legal analyst, author of The Russian Hoax, #1 New York Times bestseller, and John Sale is a former special prosecutor, having served in the prestigious New York Southern District of New York and an assistant special Watergate prosecutor. Welcome both of you to the program. Rod Rosenstein's about to flying on Air Force One with the president, but let me ask you both first about the treatment and what is... You know, I know we're supposed to be happy when there's a victory and the good guy wins, but at what cost?
Well, you know, I will say that Susan Collins put it best. She condemned the outrageous behavior, the distortions by special interest groups, all of the activists and protesters and Democratic senators. She made it clear that their shameful tactics, the smears, the character assassination, backfired on them as far as her vote is concerned. And last night on 60 Minutes, she reiterated that. She said, look, these political threats and attempts at bribery have backfired on her. It made her steel her determination to make sure that Kavanaugh was being treated fairly with the presumption of innocence and due process. She said, that is relevant to our advise and consent duty.
Let me ask you, John Sale, I know you've been in more than a few political battles in your life, and we watched this process unfold. I mean, and it got worse and worse, you know, literally crescendoing at what? When Michael Avenatti represents a woman that claims almost on a weekend basis that young girls were systematically drugged, boys lining up in the hall to rape them one after another, and that was a normal weekend, and that would happen, and not just once, but multiple times, and no parent, no law enforcement, no teacher was ever told, ever. All your years in the prosecutor's office, would you be a bit suspicious at that story?
Well, you'd be more than a bit suspicious. I mean, you would just reject it out of hand. But Sean, going forward, there's something very special about the Supreme Court. You know, the fact that the confirmation was 50-48, it's not like we're trying to beat a point spread. It's now Justice Kavanaugh. It's no longer Judge Kavanaugh. He was confirmed. And the Supreme Court just must be above the fray and not send out political signals. And I think the editorial he wrote where he said, the op-ed, that he was going to be independent and impartial, obviously he will be. And I just hope that it does not, the awful things that have happened in the last week do not affect the public's confidence in the independence of the Supreme Court.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. And then we have to ask the question, will the party that was responsible for all of this, will there be a price to pay in 29 days? Well, I mean, in other words, I talk about every election. Republicans are racist, sexist, misogynist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic. They want dirty air, water, and they want to kill Granny and throw her over a cliff, and they want to kill children. Well, now it's, you know, coat hangers being sent, and it's just the same tactics. Those
tactics, I think, are backfiring on the Democrats and all of the activists and protesters and these special interest groups. The polling data, Sean, is very revealing. There was some apathy among Republicans, as is often the case in a midterm election. And suddenly that changed and transformed GOP voters into energized and motivated voters to get out on Election Day next month, because they see what is going to happen if they lose the House and the Senate, because Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler, who would then become chairman of the Judiciary Committee if Democrats win the House, are vowing to exact revenge, a retribution investigation to remove Kavanaugh from the Supreme Court by virtue of articles of impeachment. And there's nothing that will motivate Republican voters more than that kind of a threat to undermine the democratic process of confirmation and to try to destabilize the Supreme Court for partisan reasons.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch. Do you think politically, John, you've watched a lot of campaigns, is the American people going to be motivated in 29 days, and are they going to remember this?
Well, I can't read the tea leaves, but what we just saw with the confirmation battle actually was an example of our separation of powers in action, where each branch exercised its appropriate role. And now, in our democracy, the people are going to decide. And, there are going to be irresponsible lawyers who are going to go on TV shows with more people who are claiming I should have been interviewed, I could have told this tale, and I just hope that people can separate the wheat from the chaff.
As a prosecutor, looking at these three cases, how would you have handled them? 36 years later, in each case, no corroboration in each case.
I don't know anything beyond what's in the public record, but without corroboration, you might entertain a meeting for an hour or two and say, thank you for coming by. There's nothing to talk about.
Okay, so when Professor Ford, for example, if she can't remember a location, she can't remember an exact date or a place, she's struggling to know the year. In the case of Miss Ramirez, she's calling other fellow students from back in the day. She's asking them if they remember because she's not sure she remembers. In the case of Julie Swetnick, who made changed her story. Well, Brett Kavanaugh gave out red Solo cups and he was near the punch bowl and I saw him in a hall, maybe not lined up in a hall, which is very different from the sworn affidavit that they had originally laid out a week before. I mean, if you look at that in a prosecutor's office, what are they going to say?
Well, they're going to say these are all frivolous accusations. But as far as we know regarding Dr. Ford, there were 9 or 10 witnesses interviewed, and people are going to say, well, there were so many more who weren't interviewed. It's not the number of interviews. It's what they have to say. And if it's all cumulative, you don't count the witnesses. But I think some of those other people, as I say now, are going to want to have their 24 hours in the sun or in the fame, and they're going to want to go to the National Enquirer or something like that. But there are no criminal cases. There are no civil cases. A good man was confirmed. He's now a justice, and we need to move on.
Let's talk about the news that we are pretty confident is coming out this week. Let me just say this very obtusely, if I can, that if a top-ranking FBI official were to confirm that there was an orchestrated effort among the upper echelon within the DOJ and the FBI to go after Donald Trump for retribution for the firing of James Comey, what would that mean, Gregg Jarrett?
It would mean that this was all a hoax, the Russia hoax, and it wasn't Trump-Russia collusion.
Well, that would mean Gregg Jarrett was right from the get-go, but yes. And
yes, and the latest information only corroborates the thesis of the book. There wasn't Trump-Russia collusion, but there was Hillary Clinton-Russia collusion. She had on her payroll a British spy who was using Russian sources. And now we've learned through the interview behind closed doors of James Baker, the top FBI lawyer, that documents were being passed to him from Hillary Clinton's lawyer and the DNC's lawyer. So, this is astonishing information. And in fact, we've also learned that, this was part of the FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. None of it was corroborated, and federal regulations are very clear. You may not submit to the FISC information and evidence that is uncorroborated, and yet that is precisely what they did. And so I agree with you when these documents are declassified, and the Inspector General has had enough time to look at them and decide. I think they will be explosive.
Is there any way that Rod Rosenstein, who signed the fourth FISA warrant, we know the basis and bulk of the information in the FISA application, John, was the unverified, uncorroborated dossier, the political document that Hillary paid for? I mean, how is it possible that they passed 4 of those? And I mean, doesn't he have to be held accountable for that?
Well, let's wait and see when the documents are declassified. But the answer to your question is, of course. We talk about the president is not above the law, and he's not, but certainly neither is the deputy attorney general. But I see one thing a little bit differently, and maybe we're going to segue into this, and that is everything you're talking about should be thoroughly investigated. But I think it's separate from what the Mueller people are doing. And I think that the Mueller investigation can conclude by showing independently that the president was just not involved in any wrongdoing. And it doesn't have to be one, or they're not necessarily linked.
Would he have an obligation? See, this is what frustrates me. I think that the mandate was so broad that we end up going into people's, bank loan applications from years gone by. To me, is just ridiculous. That considering where it was supposed to start and where it was supposed to go, would it not lead to an important issue, especially if Russian lies were paid for and disseminated to the American people to purposely lie to them before an election, and worse than that, used in FISA applications to spy on an opposition party candidate, and then used later to destroy a president who was duly elected?
Well, 100%. And if those things are verified, the people involved should be held responsible criminally. But I'm saying that the Mueller investigation in and of itself can conclude by showing the president didn't do anything wrong. One of the dangers of a special counsel or a special prosecutor is they have only one case. So they're on a mission. But what I've always believed is if a special counsel does a thorough investigation and concludes that in this case the president did not do anything wrong, that special counsel has not failed. The special counsel has done a thorough investigation, and in this case, we haven't seen any evidence to show that Donald Trump was involved in collusion, obstruction, or whatever you want to call it.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back more with Gregg Jarrett and John Sayles. All right, as we continue with Gregg Jarrett and John Sayles. And all right, so Rod Rosenstein, why would he even be in the mix, considering we now know and have corroboration, Gregg Jarrett, that he was saying, well, what do you want me to wear a wire around the president?
Well, he has a lot to answer for, and the president, I'm sure, spoke to him about it on Air Force One today. Did you really try to get people to secretly record me? Did you recruit people to invoke the 25th Amendment to depose me from office? Now, we know Rosenstein is going to not deny it. Whenever he's caught engaging in illicit, if not illegal activities, he claims his words were misinterpreted. Over and over again, we've seen examples of that. Threats to the Intelligence Committee staff, threats to Devin Nunes. Oh, I'm just misunderstood. Rosenstein must be the most misunderstood man in Washington, D.C., but it would be imprudent politically for the president to fire him. He has no intention of doing so. Rosenstein, must receive Mueller's report, and I think the president wants to see how that will play out. And I think it's beginning to wind down. Many of the people on Mueller's staff have already left and returned their jobs at the Department of Justice. So I think that is reaching a conclusion. I agree with John. No collusion, no obstruction, and then let's launch a serious investigation with a grand jury into people at the Department of Justice and the FBI who engaged in this, what I believe to be an illicit, illegal scheme to frame Donald Trump.
We'll take a break here, but we got to say goodbye to Gregg Jarrett, John Sayles. Thank you both for being with us.